I think when it comes to mental health, we need more help. There's a crazy epidemic that gets brought up in a lot of media. I think of movies, television, even documentaries, I think talk about this to some capacity, but not enough. My goal in regards to the scope of addressing mental health, specifically in men, not that it doesn't affect women too, and I'll touch a little bit about that, but I'm more talking from the perspective of a guy. We need more help. We need more resources. We need to talk about it more, and specifically in regards to depression, other mental illnesses like bipolar, like body dysmorphia, all these different things that plague our minds. And we need to do it in such a way, and then also like the thing where, like, do I say it? Part of me thinks about YouTube guidelines. The unaliving. I'll say unalive. Some people don't like that. I don't know a better way to say it. So unaliving yourself. All of that gets encompassed in the mind. Because this world outside of the garden is insanely hard. It's insanely hard. I know from my experience. Well, do I want to go there? I'll wait for my own personal experience. I do have experiences with a couple of things. The unaliving, the depression, ideation, all that stuff. And I'll get to it in a second. I actually kind of want to open up just some statistics in regards to mental health in the West, and then specifically in America, and then specifically men. So let's just kind of just do a little bit of look some numbers, because I think numbers matter, especially if we're talking about human life. And it's really sad. It's insanely sad. In regards to unaliving yourself, most Western countries, so we're talking about like Canada, United States, Central America, South America, the West, it's most common in men, which is interesting because men typically, not all the time, typically are more rational or more logical. I'll use that term. We think more with a sense of rhetoric where we go from point A to point B to point C to point D. We go down the whole alphabet. And you would think that unaliving yourself due to depression, anxiety, name a couple of things that run around in people's minds. You would think that in order to go through with something like that, that you would have to be kind of out of it. But then you kind of start thinking a little bit harder and you're like, no, wait, that actually kind of makes a little bit sense. It makes sense why men, particularly more men versus women, go through with it. And then you kind of start looking like, oh, they're actually thinking about this. Ideation. Where life in their mind, the people who go through it, in their mind, they go, no, life is too hard. This is why I'm going to do this. And that's scary. That's scary because to take on that weight and to then rationalize it, that's sad. It's tragic. And then you look at like the rates. So in 2001, this is just me reading stat. 2001, the U.S. had a unaliving rate of approximately 14.2 per 100,000 people. So every couple 100,000 people, 14 of those people, 14 and change, go through with it. And like I said, man, that's sad. That's so sad. And this is kind of like, I think, I don't want to say it's a more Western thing, because I think And maybe it is. Because I don't hear about stuff like this in the East. Like in India, I don't know. I think in India, like, it's more like just like people are just impoverished because there's not enough resources. Or I think of like different parts of Africa, and it's like, but they like, you go to Africa. I know people who like went on mission trips to Africa, like in my first church, and they'll tell you a lot of those African tribes that don't have a lot of stuff, they're happy. But you just go down my block, somebody who has AC, 65-inch TV, motorcycles, or cars, and they don't want to be here. Age is like a huge thing too. It's usually people that are older. So not so much like younger men, which would probably be like, it doesn't say here in this particular statistic. It just says that people who are older. So I'm assuming, let's take like, I don't know, age 30 and up. So anybody 30 and below, the chances of a male doing the thing, lower. So this is an older man thing, which makes sense. I think of people who have midlife crises where they lose a job, they go through a divorce, they go through a bunch of stuff, and they don't know what to do. And again, then men, because we have a type of rhetoric where we can rationalize things very easily, we then make that decision where we go, check it out. And that's really sad. Other trends would be like, I look at, there is one country actually on the Eastern Hemisphere that I think about in regards to also high rates of unaliving. That would be Japan. So Japan, they work insane amount of hours. They work. Work. I'll give you an example. I love manga and I love watching anime. The artists that slave away to make manga, let's just use manga for example. Mangakas, which is just a manga, it's just a comic book artist in Japan. A mangaka, when they go to make a serialized manga, they have a publisher, which would probably be like Shonen Jump or name a magazine. And I think a study was done like back in like early mid 2010s. And actually, I think they looked at the life of what's the artist's name that made Hunter x Hunter? Some of those, they did like a small study on those types of artists, the really high successful people. And they found out that a mangaka works essentially the whole day, every day of the week. And they tracked, okay, what's their free time look like? They have 3 hours of free time. Guys, there's 24 hours in a day. So you're going to tell me 21 hours. And 21 hours, they're just working all the time. And that causes, forget the mental strain. Your body goes through stuff because a lot of these artists, they don't have big studios in Japan. Actually, a lot of like environments in Japan, like a lot of like living situations, they're very small studio spaces. And everything's a little bit smaller in Japan. So you're cramped up under doing, you should wake up early. You literally wake up, you immediately start working. Forget eating. You don't have to eat, right? So you don't eat. You don't eat. You're penciling, inking, trying to get at least 20 to 30 pages for a serialized manga. And then the 3 hours you have is for sleeping, eating, and going to the restroom. And maybe taking a shower if you have time. That's sad. And then you have to then expedite that or compound that on other businesses in Japan where, like, you know, a manga studio, man, they imagine working hours just to try to make something that looks cool for somebody to watch for like an hour. Guys, what are we doing? like the world, what are we doing? There's a reason why God gave us one day for rest. Because we shouldn't be working all the time because our bodies have limitations, our minds have limitations, our heart has limitations. And the more we work and then never find deep rest, then we will always be depressed. Then we will always have anxiety. Then we will always want to unalive ourselves. because that weight just gets piled and 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 piled. And then I think about men who don't know how to express emotions, especially in the West. So let's go back to the West. So in the West, we have a lot of pressure as men. We have to take care of our families. We have to work really hard. And we have to then be there for our communities. And we have to be men of God. And we have to look like Christ. That's what Ephesians says, right? So in Ephesians, Paul's talking to the Ephesian church, and he's like, or the church in Ephesus, he's like, so guys, husbands, let's start there. Husbands, you guys are to be like Christ, where as Christ laid down his life for his bride, you have to do the same thing. Great. So now I have to die. Okay. Paul, come on, homie. He didn't have a wife. And then he has this claim for men who are husbands. You are called as a man of God to lay down your life for your wife and for your kids. And then everybody else is secondary. But that's like the hardest thing to do. I think of Jesus, who chose to do it. Like, people think like, oh, we killed Jesus. And obviously we had a part to play in putting nails in his hands and putting him on a cross. But Jesus chose that because he told Peter right before he got taken away. He's like, you don't think I can just summon a bunch of angels and wreck shop? That's Jesus. And then miraculously puts a dude's ear back on his head. Jesus is so cool. So Jesus, the number one gangster, he chose to lay down his life. And men make those choices every day. But from what I've seen in church, people out of church, like in the secular world, and then in my life, men get treated like garbage. There's no other word for it. And I think of Father's Day. Father's Day is ranked number 18 out of like all the holidays. There's 17 other holidays that are ranked higher than Father's Day. That is sad. We don't care about dads. We don't care about men. We don't care about a lot of masculinity. We don't care about anything. There's this book that I'm reading by Jason Wilson. This book is goated. This book is amazing. It's called Cry Like a Man. And this book, it talks about masculinity. And not just masculinity, but also like the emotional hard places that men build up because we feel like that we can't feel. If you grew up in like the projects, or you grew up in a rough neighborhood, or you grew up, I don't know, in a trailer park, most of those environments cultivated men that you're not allowed to feel. You're not allowed to be vulnerable. You're not allowed to be weak. You just have to man up. And that's messed up. That's not fair to us men. Because I look at emotions just on a surface level. Forget what emotions that are like volatile. Let's just talk about emotions on a very base level, and then we'll talk about the more toxic stuff in a second. Emotions are a gift from God. Now, some people disagree with that. And to those people, I think you're kind of dumb. Emotions are barometers. Emotions are barometers that let us know when something is wrong. They were placed inside of us to feel and know, this hurts. Like, God experiences feelings too. Now, obviously, it's a little bit different than us because we're constrained to time, space, and matter. God is outside of time, space, and matter, but God is with us. Like when we talk about God, we can't just talk about him from the past or the future. Like, he's with me right now as I'm doing this video. And as I'm doing things in life, there's things that I do that grieve his heart. I'm a sinner. But there's also things that I do that make God happy, that he delights in. Then there's things that I do that's a mixed bag of everything. Back to this book for a second. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, and I don't want to do that. There's a quote in this book That really I love a lot. It's in the prologue. It's actually like not even the first chapter. Jason Wilson, he says this amazing thing that I really do think points to the fact that like it's really hard for men to feel because of the amount of criticism we get for feeling. And then what we do is then we bottle it up, and then at some point the bottling has to explode at some point, or at least implode from the inside out. So this is a quote from his book, and the W quote. I'm going to back up a sentence before what I highlighted. So the sentence before it says, if we're stuck in our hearts, like, in our health or our wallets, there's no room for weakness. This is his observation of men in the West. So that's the critique. And then this is what ends up coming about. When we vent, we're perceived as complainers. When we hurt, we're wimps. When we're tired, we're being lazy. When we fight, we're rebels. When we're discouraged, we're depressed. When we hesitate, we're double-minded. And when we cry, we're soft. Well, all these predetermined judgments about us, it's no wonder why so many of us fake it to make it. And that is sad. In order to be successful in the West, as a man, you're not allowed to feel. And I think that's unbiblical for many reasons. I'm going to use some people from the Bible as an example and how God used them in light of not just what they were feeling, but also their worst feelings, like the toxic stuff. And now I'll kind of touch into some of that stuff too. Let's start with, Moses. He's a good example. So Moses lives a very privileged life. His mom has this idea to then put him in the Nile River in order for him to live. Because Pharaoh at the time, we don't know which Pharaoh, but the Pharaoh at the time was killing all the firstborn men in the Israelite community because the Israelites were just too many. Just too many people. So Pharaoh's idea, he's like, man, usually when I've seen rebellions happen in my time, it's usually because there's a lot of people. So his bright idea is mass genocide, as a dictator ruler would, right? And then, but Moses' mom puts him in the Nile. He then gets into the palace, where now Moses becomes part of a culture that's not his own. Actually, his name, if you actually read his name in actual Hebrew, if you were to compare it to other Hebrew names, Moses' name is predominantly Egyptian, especially the way it sounds. Moses, that's how you kind of say it in in Egyptian and stuff like that. And then some of the pharaohs that we do know about that might have been around Moses' time, like Ramesses. So Moses or Moses means to be drawn out, basically out of nothing. Ramesses means, or Ramses, that means to be drawn out of Ra, so the god of Ra. And Moses lives in Egypt. He gets an education. He can write. He can do all this stuff, living in the palace. But there's something inside of Moses that we notice soon as he grows up, that there's this type of wrath inside of him. And I'm going to try to read a little bit between the lines. We don't know Moses' dad. We know his mom. And his mom kind of had, I believe, I could be wrong, because I always conflate the movie with actual scripture, but I do believe that his mom was a handmaiden in helping grow up Moses in the palace, along with his Egyptian mom. I know in the movie he doesn't see his mom, so I think I'm right. Fact check me. Read the Bible. But Moses we don't know about Moses' dad, which is interesting. Because then what we see, not having healthy men around you. I mean, we just look at the Egyptian environment back in Moses' day. They enslaved people. And then you have slave masters, predominantly men, as far as I know. I don't think women did this. And what we read in the Bible is men whipping the slave people. There's an Egyptian slave master who is beating an Israelite. And this is what the Bible says. It says Moses looked one way, and then he looked the other way. And when he saw that nobody was watching, Moses, in his purest anger, pure wrath, murders this dude, beating the Israelite, and then buries him in the sand. So toxic masculinity came out in a murderous way. Now, when you see the words like, "Oh, Moses looked both ways and he didn't see that anybody was around," the way the Bible talks about perception and worldview is through our physical, natural eyes. That we see things a very certain way, a very type of way. And Moses thought in his judgment, "Oh, nobody's gonna see me murder this dude, and I kind of want to murder him because he's now." Is the intent to stand up for the Israelite? Yeah. But then you read a little bit more where Moses sees two Israelites fighting. And then the two Israelites that are fighting, he's like, "Hey, why are you guys fighting each other?" And then they have a critique on comment on Moses, where they say, "Oh, bro, who made you ruler and judge over us? Like, because we know you murdered the Egyptian slave master yesterday." And that critique is the fact that Moses has a heart hell-bent on murdering people. This type of anger, again, probably rooted in an environment where he didn't really have a good father figure, and then also sees a bunch of men just treating other men and women horribly his whole life. And you know what Moses does? This man runs away for 40 years into the desert and becomes a hobo. he becomes a hermit. He becomes a hermit and just coasts. He's like, I'm just going to run away. So that's Moses. Let's look at Elijah. So Elijah, one of the best prophets in Israel, in 1 Kings, has a whole competition with 800 other prophets that worship the god Baal. Now Baal and Molech, these are gods that were worshipped around the time that Elijah was a prophet. And these prophets in Israel, their goal was to worship these gods. They were essentially like fertility gods. That, oh, okay, if we worship these gods, we're gonna get like a bunch of babies, and like they're gonna be healthy, and we just want to. It was idolized sex gods. And how you would commit sacrifice to them is that you would take children and burn them alive. Huh? And of course, God don't like that. Like, God instituted, you will never have to give up your son for me or your children for me. I'll do that. I.e., look at what happened to Abraham and then what happened to Jesus. When God tested Abraham, God made a point saying, you will never have to give up your kid for me, because that's a testament to faith that you trust me over the things that I've given you. But here we have the Israelites in Elijah's time just giving up their kids for fun for these sex gods. And then when Elijah, so the competition is like, okay, you guys put your stuff here, I'm going to put my stuff here. Let's see who brings down fire from heaven. Elijah brings fire down from heaven because God loves him that much, and then like doesn't just burn the offering that that Elijah had, burns up like the whole area. And then, if you were a false prophet, GG, you're cooked, literally. and so they were put to death by the sword. And Elijah gets scared from the woman Jezebel. Jezebel said, basically swore to her own gods, like, I'm going to hunt you down and murder you. And that scared Elijah to the point where he was like, I got to dip. A lot of these prophets just kind of dip for like a long period of time. And Elijah not only was scared, but also got depressed. Why? Why did Elijah get depressed when he just brought fire down from heaven? He got depressed because he realized, man, I could have God work through me doing the most miraculous thing. doing the most miraculous thing. And nobody cares that God is real. Nobody cares that God sees their sin. Nobody cares about their own heart and their condition. Like, there's no hope. And the weight of that hopelessness put Elijah in such a state where, God, take me out. Where he was hiding under a broom, I think it's called a broom bush tree. It's like a low, it's barely a tree. And instead, God doesn't chastise him. He doesn't correct him. Actually, you know what God does? It says the messenger of Yahweh, or the angel of the Lord, comes and makes a little bit of food for Elijah. I think it's fish and bread. He makes fish and bread out of nowhere. Where do you get fish and bread from the desert? I don't know. God just does that freely. and he tells Elijah, eat, take a nap. Wakes up, he feeds him again. He's like, all right, go into the desert. And Elijah walks 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. Gets onto Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai. Again, a mountain that Moses walked on. And then God showed up in just a whisper, asking Elijah, like, what are you doing here, bro? And then Elijah would then say, like, I'm zealous for you. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. I'm trying my best. He does that twice. And then God says, go back to Damascus. So go down the mountain, go back to Damascus. And there's about 8,000 people I've preserved that worship me. Go and anoint those people. And then one of them being Elisha, which would be Elijah's Robin to his Batman. But there was a time where Elijah didn't want to be there, where he asked God, take me out. I can't do it. Last biblical example, and then I'll talk about like my testimony, and then I'll kind of wrap everything up. David. There's times where David will write a psalm. And he goes, God, your love endures forever. Your mercies are like God. David will say cool stuff about God all the time. You make me lie down in green pastures, and oh my God, you're so good, and you're a shepherd. I lack nothing. And then the very next psalm, David's like, I'm going to murder all the people, God. Murder all of my enemies. Kill all my enemies. Break their teeth. But kill the wicked. Like David gets wrung out. And I think David knew how important it was to give his emotions to God every time. Every time. And I think in light of those three examples, we as men need to find ourselves in a place where we subject all of our thoughts to Christ. That's what Paul says in the New Testament. That every thought that we have, the good, the bad, and the ugly, subject it to Christ. Should put it under his feet. To subject something is to put under. Because Jesus stomped on that serpent. The one that convinced us to believe that emotion is the end all be all to the deepest hurts that we have, and that there's no hope. But then Jesus would then not only die, be ransomed for 3 days under the ground, and then raise up again on the third day with resurrection life. My experience, and then I'll capstone with Jesus. So about over a decade ago, I didn't want to be here. I had actually Elijah's story I resonated deeply with about a decade ago. There was a time where I was sitting on a bench, and I told God, I don't want to be here. And in front of me was a lake and a forest. And I said, God, either I go into that lake and I drown, or you let me walk in that forest and an animal takes me out, because I can't do it. The weight of my dad being hospitalized from working too hard, trying to finish high school with my dad in the hospital, and then also feeling very alone, on top of like just not having healthy relationships at all, like with my family, or like girls didn't like me. So imagine all that stuff, all the nerdy things that I go through or went through as like a kid. So all that stacked on top of my dad's in the hospital. And then my aunt passed away, who was like a second mom to me out of nowhere. Totally unexpected. And I saw her body get rolled out of her house, and I had to be there for my cousin, who's like a brother to me, and see him carry his mom out. And then soon after that, when I started college, losing hair at 19. I was shocked, bro. Like mentally, I was shocked. Like there's no way. So that weight of, man, being outside of the garden sucks because there's just too much pain here. And I was like, God, I just want to be with you. Honestly, if I could just have a shortcut to you, I'll take that. I'll take that shortcut. And at the time, the person that I was with, they pulled me out of that darkness. And I'm grateful. Because I had no... I went through the mental rabbit hole of like, oh yeah, I could totally do it. Because I had left my phone behind so nobody could find me. And somehow this person found me still. Okay, God, you're funny. But God answered my prayer in the way that I didn't know it was going to be answered. I asked God to take me out, and he literally took me out of darkness. And the funny thing about that story too is I went back to that neighborhood where I sat on that bench, and I actually saw like a snake in the woods that I was going to not be here. And I was literally over the snake, standing on top of like a hill. It was like so it was like the lake had like a sewage drain, and that sewage drain went into the woods. And in the sewage drain was like a dark snake, like a dark. It looked like a snake that don't belong in Florida, honestly. And it was in the sewage drain, and then it slithered into the woods. And it was like God was kind of showing me like, that's what I saved you from. When you didn't want to be here, I got you out of that. I saved you. And then I think about, okay, so Jesus Christ gave me victory. But how did Jesus feel about suffering? And obviously the easiest answer would be like, let's look at the cross. Like he literally, his back was open, he was carrying a cross. We could talk about all that. But I kind of want to talk about something that most pastors have talked about in the past, and then I'll end it here. Jesus gets a letter from his entourage back home where he hears that Lazarus died. Or actually, that's not even the first message. The first message is that Lazarus is sick. And Jesus, oh man, healer, redeemer, come back home. And yeah, your boy Lazarus, he's dying. We need you. You can heal him. And this is towards the end of Jesus' ministry. And Jesus doesn't run back to Lazarus, his homeboy. What Jesus does is that he lets him die. Now you would think, Jesus, don't you love Lazarus? You know he's sick. And you've healed plenty of people at this point. You've taken demons out of people. You've restored sight to the blind. You've restored hearing to the deaf. You've even there's some occasions where he did some miraculous healing where people were dead and he brought them back to life. And did it fast. It wasn't oh, let's let Lazarus cook his death. Let's let Lazarus cook. That's insane. And then you have to kind of wonder, okay, what's the purpose of letting Lazarus go through that? Where he's deathly sick and he's praying and clinging on to life and then actually dies. And then not only dies, but was buried in a tomb. And then Jesus finally gets there. And then the people are upset at Jesus. I would be upset at Jesus. And no, God knows how many things I've gone through in life. And I'm like, God, help me, And Jesus, it's one of my favorite lines of scripture. And it's the easiest to remember because it's that short. Knowing that Jesus was going to bring him back from the dead. I walk through that whole scene in my head all the time. So Jesus, he's in another town. Gets word that Lazarus is sick, lets him die again, and then lets him stay in the tomb to where the body starts, decomposing. And then goes to town, talks to the people, and people are mad with him. And Jesus goes, like he knows he's going to heal Lazarus. Not just heal him, he's going to bring him back from the dead. And my favorite 2 words of scripture, the easiest verse you could ever remember, Jesus wept. You're going to tell me that the God of the universe cried. And that word wept, it doesn't just mean cry. It means like Jesus lost it. Like he was so sad. He was wailing. And if the God of the universe, who was fully God and fully man, knowing that he's going to bring Lazarus back from the dead, but still felt, then we as men have no excuse but to feel. It's okay to feel. This is my permission to you this is my permission to you as a man. If you have so much weight, don't hold on to it. Feel. God wants you to feel. And when you feel, give that to him. Lay it at his feet. I can't tell you how many times I go to church and I see men in our church, and they are so comfortable just staying in their seat. And it's not the only church like I've seen that. I've seen that in a lot of churches in the West, where it's so easy to just, you go through your week and you just hold on to that stuff yourself. Why are you holding on to it? You come to church on Sunday to give it to Jesus. Like Jesus wept. Feel. Get mad. Give it to God. I understand. I understand because I didn't do that for a long time in my first church. In my first church, I didn't do that. I didn't do it in the beginning. I started to realize that in that season when I was in high school, where like my life blew up, I realized, I need to feel. And I tapped into it pretty fast. And when I tapped into it pretty fast, I looked at people around me and I would see like how people were just like not feeling. Or they would put on a type of front or a mask where they're like, no, I'm not going to feel, because it's easier to not feel. Yeah, but at some point you're going to explode on the people around you. And I've done that in light of now through some things I'm going through right now. And I feel pretty readily. So I can only imagine somebody who has a job, who has a family, who has kids, who has a wife, that has all these, or has a house, has to do mortgage, all the stuff, and then you're going to hold on all that on a Sunday, where the whole point is to worship and give it to Jesus. Guys, we gotta start feeling. I recommend getting this book. I'm not all the way through it yet. I'm about a fourth of the way through. And I'm already in love with this book. Human beings, guys, specifically guys, we need to feel. We need to be authentic with our emotions. We need to trust the fact that like God wants you to feel. And you've been crippled by your dad. You've been crippled by your dad because your dad caused a lot more damage to you by saying you're not allowed to feel. And sorry, I wish we had better dads in the West. But we don't. And I think of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air episode where Will's dad is in town, and I think his dad wanted to try to have a genuine relationship with his kid, but it's just too hard and it's too awkward, and he doesn't know where to start, and like he was gone for most of his life. He doesn't know what to do. And then Will has this moment with Uncle Phil where he's like, "My dad don't love me, man." And like that's truth. That's what we experience here in America. I can't speak to like Canada or like Central America or anything like that. In America and US, United States of America, My dad don't love me, man. Why do you don't love me? It's true. If you're a dad and you've been absent from your kids, it's never too late to just invest in them again. Like, you can call them. You can make a drive out. And it's gonna be hard and awkward if you haven't been there. But God would want you to be there as much as you can. As much as, your kids are willing to let you. And then to the sons that don't have or a good relationship with their dad, when that day happens, be open, trust that God is better, and see where it takes you. And then the wisdom is, even if I didn't have my dad, and I'm experiencing all these emotions because of the environment I grew up in, the way my dad treated me, and then all the bad decisions I made, knowing that Jesus died for all that, and that when he brought you to life, he cried, because he cried for Lazarus. He cried knowing that you were going to go through a lot of pain, but that if you knew him, that it would all be worth it, and that it would never go to waste. And at the end of time, in Revelation, Jesus is not just going to wipe away your physical scars. I got scars on my elbow and on my knees and on my ankle. Actually, I just burned myself the other day. Now, the physical scar, I'm going to have a new body that's not going to have these physical scars, but that includes our mind. And Jesus won't just, he won't just give me a new body. He will wipe away my tears. That includes not just my physical scars, my emotional and spiritual scars, where all of that will be made new. And my hope for you, man, as a dude, as a man of God, is that you would feel, because Jesus felt. And he didn't just felt, he is feeling. We say that Jesus is love, he is feeling, he has emotions. God has emotions in light of our present right now, as we are constrained to a linear time frame. And even though he's outside of time, he's present with us, and he feels. And in light of glory, I would like to think that when Jesus wipes away every tear, Jesus' last tear will be oh, I did it. We all did it. We're here. And he wouldn't have to wipe away his own tears, because it wouldn't matter anymore at that point. But I would like to think Jesus' last tears would be that he's just happy that we're all there. And it's today, guys, it starts today, just trusting that God is better. And if you don't know the Lord, you should give him a chance. Because then Jesus would then say, if you are heavy laden, if you're burdened, if you're carrying too much weight, find yourself in your weakest state and I'll carry you. Because then he'll say my yoke is easy. To be yoked to Jesus means you don't have to, you could be falling behind and Jesus will carry you on his back. That's what the cross was. It was carrying you on his back while it was shredded open. Sweat and blood just dripping down into his eyes. That's where I'm going to cap it. Guys, my prayer for you is, I said, just know the Lord, trust Jesus with your hurt. And you'll start to find that healing come a little bit quicker. This has been Kenny at the table. This episode's a little long because I think I wanted it to be. It's important that we talk about these things because Jesus talked about it. And he didn't just talk about it. He felt it. But this is Kenny at the table. Love you guys. Peace. Go to church. Get wrung out. That's what it comes down to. Love you guys. Talk to you later.